Okay, we are live. Hello, Renana.
Hi, Jen. It's nice to see you.
Nice to see you also. So I am recording this before I have the class list of who is joining us for this session of the Scarsdale Teachers Institute. So I know there's going to be some people in here who know you very well and are happy to see you and who miss you and miss you being part of this program. But for those of the group that are new, do you want to just introduce yourself and how you come to being on this recording today?
So my name is Renana Schvil. I have a cooking school for kids in Westchester. So I'm usually very close to you guys geographically. I am now spending a few months in Israel with my family. My husband and I are both Israeli, and with Corona, we haven't been here in a while, so we decided to kind of take a half a sabbatical. There's my daughter in the back. Naomi, everybody will see you.
I love that.
So we're spending a few months here in Israel. And I used to lead these workshops with Jen. So it's nice to be here as a guest.
Yes, we're so glad. Okay, so we're talking about spices this week, obviously. And when we watch this, we will have talked about farmers who are growing spices locally, sourcing spices in the United States, but from abroad. And I'm curious, now that you've been in Israel for a couple of months, what have you noticed differences in the spices there? And you must know this from previous time spent there versus in the States.
Well, I did live here until I was about 26, but now as a mother of a family, then I cook a lot more, and so I purchase a lot more food. So I'm noticing different things. So spices are definitely, I mean, you can absolutely find them in delis and in small supermarkets, but the best place to get spices are in the market, where it's super fresh, and they have different. They kind of have a booth or a store in the market, and they have sorry, that's my dog. They have multiple spice stores in one market. It's not like they have one, and you come into the store, and you're surrounded by the smells of different spices, and it's a very visual experience as well. Some have piles of spices of different color and different kinds of paprika, and it's all orange and yellow, and it's gorgeous, and you can smell how fresh it is. I don't know much about growing spices in Israel. I assume some farms do grow the spices here, but I'm sure they're also brought from abroad, just like.
Yeah, and when you say fresh, I mean, I'm curious about that too, because obviously, like fresh on from like a agricultural perspective is like recently harvested. But when you're talking about spices, we're talking about like how recently it was ground, I would guess, because I imagine what you're talking about, those piles are like, let's say the ground paprika, which is going to be dried peppers, but maybe they're not ground until
a later stage.
Yeah,
and that's. Yeah, and some people do grind their own spices here. I mean, I'm thinking about my mom. She always, when she came to visit me in New York, not in recent years, but let's say 10, 15 years ago, her suitcase was full of spices for me. We always used to laugh at her that, how you're gonna get caught. You're not supposed to bring that.
Yeah.
But it's like, I don't care. I can't use the spices in New York. They don't smell like anything. They have no flavor. And so she used to bring spices for me that she grinds on her own.
And so you definitely can tell the difference in the flavor and the scent when you use spices there in your cooking. Are you like enjoying cooking in a different way these past months?
Well, you could get good spices in New York as well. So I don't feel like I'm missing out. But yeah, but the experience of buying spices is completely different.
Yeah.
It's like every spice store is like, they really know what they're doing. You're not just getting it out of plastic containers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you think like are the selection of spices similar to what you would find in the States, or what are sort of the most popular things that you see when you're in the markets there?
So I think probably the most common are cumin for sure. A lot of cumin going on. And there's also spices that, or herbs, I should say, that you can't really get in the States in their best form. Let's say za'atar, which is, it's kind of like oregano. But when you get it in New York, it's always mixed with other things. It has sesame seeds, it has salt. But here you can get, I mean, I get the actual herbs, which are they're kind of like oregano, as I said, but I let them dry, and then I just kind of, sprinkle it on top of something, and it just, the flavor is like 100 times amplified.
Yeah, than something than the blend.
Right. So that's something that I will definitely miss, or maybe I'm going to be the one who brings.
You're going to start bringing back. Are there spices that you're missing?
No, I don't think so. No. And actually, talking about growing spices, and if vanilla is considered a spice, I just I went to this. It's a new culinary institute here in Tel Aviv, and they do a lot of collaboration with different farms who are coming up with different ways of growing things. And so they were telling us about this company that they came up with a way that they can grow vanilla in Israel, because vanilla can only be grown in very warm places like Madagascar or maybe a couple other places in the world.
And it's an orchid. It grows from it's the bean pod of an orchid.
Right. And so they figured a way to grow vanilla in Israel, and they came up with a technology. I think from what they told us, it is a very difficult process of drying up the vanilla beans. And so they came up with, so it's kind of like a high-tech company that has to do with farming. And they came up with a way of drying the vanilla beans in a way that the vanilla that they are able to produce from it is like the best vanilla in the world.
Really?
Yeah. So I thought that was
try it. Did you get to try it?
Oh no, we didn't.
Not yet.
Yeah.
Okay. So you were talking about your mom. You mentioned your mom travels with spices. Do you have any spices that are like evocative of your family or any particular memories?
Well, my mom was born in Tunisia, and she immigrated to Israel in the 50s. So her food is mostly North African, and that's the flavors that she uses. And as I said, she always does grind her own spices. And so a very strong memory that I have as a child is her getting ready for the Passover Seder. And for Passover, you kind of, a lot of families, they have to just change all the dishes, and it's completely different foods. Everything needs to be kosher for Passover. So that's one time of year that she used to grind all her spices at the same time, because it all has to be new and it can't be used before. So I remember her spending a few hours before Passover just grinding more and more and more spices, and the kitchen would just be filled with different scents. And yeah, it's that kind of memory for a very young age, probably when I was like 6 or 7. And then the food would taste amazing, and you can smell every dish and exactly what she put in it.
Yeah.
Oh,
that's amazing. I've been thinking about spice memory, or like those sort of like scents that are evocative. And for me, I think it's like the cinnamon clove allspice mixture. And my mom used to just put it on the stove with a little warm water and just let it, set the house.
Yeah.
So you obviously you're cook often with kids. Tell me about how you think about combining spices. So what sort of criteria do you use in terms of, I mean, obviously there might be some that are blends that are typical, but are you thinking about things like heat versus warmth or other characteristics when you blend your spices?
So I'm thinking, I usually don't, with kids, I don't use a lot of spicy, like things that are going to be very hot and are going to be um, challenging for kids to taste. But there's so many things that you can use that are not spicy but have a lot of flavor in them. And so I'm thinking about different blends. A blend for me that always reminds me of my mom, and it's very North African, is to use cumin and caraway and maybe some paprika. And that's something that's used, for example, in tomato sauce, like a salsa that they make, or the base for a shakshuka.
I always think you use shakshuka in the, use caraway in the shakshuka that you've shared with us in previous sessions. And
Yeah.
there's something about that is always striking to me. And one of the projects we're doing this week is to do some research on spices. So I think caraway is on that list, but I don't think of that as a North African spice. I think of caraway, for me, it's like rye bread or sauerkraut.
Right.
So that's always so interesting to me when it's in there. It's not a spice I use often, and I don't ever think about it in things like with tomatoes, for example.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Some things are, they seem foreign, but they work,
Yeah. And I think about that shakshuka, and there's also the version that I guess I was more familiar with first, which was like, I think it's called Eggs in Purgatory is how it's called. So that would be like a tomato sauce that I think of more sort of with my Italian background. And that would have like oregano.
Rosemary, maybe?
No, probably. Well, maybe, but it was probably more oregano, pepper, and basil. Yeah. And that would be the tomato. And you were talking about that when we were talking before we started recording about like tomato sauce is going to, it's all kind of the same, but in different regions, your spice blends are really what sets it apart. The main ingredient, the tomato, is the same.
Right. But then you dress it up with different spices, and it's a completely different experience of eating it and smelling it. Yeah.
And so one of the things we talked about was, we were chatting about ideas for cooking, and you were mentioning, you can make a soup with different versions. So you want to talk through like what, if you were going to make the lentil soup that you talked about, what are the 3 ways that you could differentiate it?
So lentils are probably, not sure if that's correct, but you can probably find lentils all over the world. Mm-hmm. And it's such a nutrition meal when you use lentils, and it's not expensive. Or I just always look at lentil soup as something very nourishing, but very simple, and kind of, everybody eats lentil soup. And so I was starting to think about, what lentil soup I make and what have I tasted at other homes or restaurants. And they're so different from one another. So I make one that's more of a North African lentil soup that has cumin and cinnamon. But then you can find something that's more still Middle Eastern. If it's something like Lebanese or Turkish, they have more of a sour flavor in it, something tart. So some use lemon juice, or some, I think Turkish lentil soup has vinegar in it. So the end result is completely different from the Moroccan one, which is a little bit sweet because of the cinnamon, and very kind of warming because of the cinnamon and the cumin. And then you have it in India as well, and it's also it's very different. We use a lot of turmeric. I assume a lot of garlic, and some even have coconut milk in it. So it takes completely different terms, and the end result, the dish that you end up with is so different.
And your spice blend can change that completely.
Right.
What about connections in the classroom? So when you teach kids about whether it's a cooking class or a baking class and you're using spices, do you have activities that you use with them?
So one thing I'd like to talk about in general, not only about spices, is where it came from and how did it end up in our kitchen. And I think with spices, you have a very long conversation that you can make of where the spices come from and was the way that they made to get to you. So that's one conversation that I think is very interesting. And other fun activities is different smelling games. If we were waiting for something to bake and we had 10 or 15 minutes, we used to blindfold the kids, if they wanted to participate in the activity, and we'd kind of choose, when the child was blindfolded, we'd choose which one we're going to give them and if we're going to trick them, and then to see if they get it right. And I'm now, as we're talking, I was thinking of an activity that
Sorry.
I think a year and a half ago, we had an English teacher that I don't remember what we were talking about, but he, as a writing prompt, I think he gave the kids a bag with peanut butter, just to smell the peanut butter, and that was a writing prompt. They had to write down their memory of what that brings to mind, smelling peanut butter.
Right. So like a sensory exploration that results in a memory writing prompt.
And I think you can absolutely do that with cinnamon for sure. Because cinnamon everybody uses cinnamon, and it brings such good memories, or maybe not, or maybe somebody has, but it definitely, it triggers something with smelling something, and it's just, it can open up people to writing and sharing some experiences. And another
the idea of like the smelling and identifying, I think there's something to like to really refining that sense of smell, and that we talk a lot about observation skills being so important for all disciplines, and usually that we talk about that as sort of like the things that we see or notice. But being able to pick up smells, especially with cooking, it's so important. But even just to build that sense of awareness of our surroundings, and then even to smell like a finished product and see if you can still smell those individual ingredients, or do they start to kind of blend together. And of course, with spices, they don't taste like what you think they're going to taste. I mean, my kids always would be like, "Ooh, cinnamon," and they would, take a fingerful and be like, "Ugh," like it does not taste good until the magic happens.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, and it's also, learning that patience of wait. I have to, if I'm going to be tested on this, I need to smell each of them separately before, and kind of build your memory by the smell, which is, it's definitely an important skill.
Yeah. And then there are those associations with spices, and like we were saying, like heat versus warmth. And just this sort of like feelings that you get from a particular spice, and how, and the connection to our physical self. So on, I guess now we're watching this on Saturday, but we will have talked about the biologic connection between spices and our bodies, and just sort of why spices were even created by plants, like how they came to be, the adaptation that results in spices, and then what our bodies and our biology react to them, and how spices can make us actually feel when we eat them.
Oh, interesting.
And I imagine so much of when you're cooking with spices that connection happens, that you make a certain dish because it's going to make you feel really cozy and warm, like the lentil soup, let's say. You talked about it being nourishing, and that being true because it's it's the lentils, and that's filling, but also the spice blend being part of that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure you're going to talk about it, about the different plant parts that spices can be. And really, I think they can be any plant part, whether It's a root.
Yeah, well, yeah, you can. I mean, I always use gingerbread as an example for teaching about plant parts, and that being kind of covers all of the parts of a plant, from the flower buds that are cloves to the ginger, which is not technically a root, but under the ground, so we sometimes call it a root.
Yeah.
And so, are there spices that you veer to in different seasons? Do you find that you have sort of like a seasonal connection to spices?
Yeah, I'd like to say that in the summer. Yeah, the summer for sure. I use a lot more herbs than spices, whether dry or fresh. Whether it's basil and thyme and rosemary. And I always, you always feel like something, I mean, maybe it's just me. You feel like something tangy in the summer. Yeah. You wanted to have it a little, you want to add a lot of lemon or something that's going to give it kind of a sour or tart flavor. So yeah, a lot of lemon zest, which is that considered a spice? It can be considered a spice, right?
I don't know. I mean, I guess you can if you can get dried lemon zest. Yeah. So yeah, sure.
Right. Yeah, that's for the summer for sure. And then in the fall, yeah, you move towards something that is more warming. Of course, cinnamon. And then, yeah, I don't think I use a lot of herbs in the winter time. Also, because they're not very available. Like fresh herbs are not available.
Yeah.
I do try to dry up some herbs and then like stick them in the freezer and use them.
Yeah.
Later. Yeah, I think
I was thinking about mint, for example. Like mint is a herb that I use all the time in the summertime.
Yeah.
And not so much in the winter because I don't like it as much dry. Do you use mint in any savory dishes or
savory dishes? Yeah, I like to use it in salad, for sure, in different salads. I just had, now you're reminding me something so delicious I had. I'm sharing it with you. It was so good.
Okay.
So I had it at a friend's house. And that's what's nice in Israel. So like, people are great cooks, and you go. I'm loving it. I haven't cooked so much myself, except for my family, but we go and we are hosted and we eat. Yeah, we eat great food. It was a cold dish, and it had tons of mint in it and parsley, lots of scallions. So I helped prepare it. I kind of helped put it together. So I was in charge of chopping up all these herbs. And then they kind of, on top of that, they dumped like probably a few cups of cooked quinoa. And then some feta cheese. Which I know feta cheese is from Greece, but they have the best kind of feta cheese in Israel. Better than the Greek kind. It's actually not, I should correct myself. It's a Bulgarian cheese, which is very similar to feta. It's just more crumbly and probably has more fat in it, and it's just so good. So they crumbled that on top, and then they also had some grapes. So they halved some green grapes in there too, and maybe it had nuts. That I can't remember. But then they grilled some red grapes as well. And then they put the grilled red grapes on top. Wow. And it was just, and they had a dressing of some sort. I think it was probably like a lemon olive oil. And it was so good.
It sounds so good. I wouldn't think of the grapes, especially the grilled grapes.
Yeah, me too. I've never used grilled grapes before. Yeah. But yeah, it was mostly herbs, and it was it was so refreshing.
Oh, it's good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I mean, I was excited to talk to you about spices. I feel like we can't talk about cooking without your insight and your being part of this program. So it was sort of necessary, but also just so good to see you. And I know for so many people who are watching are happy to see you as well. And we'll see you back stateside sometime soon. You're going to come back?
We're coming back in January. So
okay.
Pretty soon.
Excellent. All right. Well, you'll share your cookie adventures when you come back. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Everyone.
Bye.
Bye.